Chapter 19, Invincibility Shot Down. I continued to go through the motions of play acting the role of counselor, which made me look good. Because the Slater home was running smoothly, Shaw found a bigger place. It was a spacious double duplex converted into a single unit with 4 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, 2 bathrooms, and 2 living rooms and 2 yards. I immediately set up a mini gym in one of the kitchens. An East Side Crips homeboy of mine, Jackie, called it the Sweat Box. The house was located on Palm Street off Compton Boulevard behind Zorber's hamburger stand. Several blocks away was Compton High School, and hanging out down the street were some Compton Crips, Movie Star, Ron Dog, Boo, Crusher, and others. At one time or another, I worked out with some of the series iron drivers such as Little James, BIGBANK, Marcellus, Bunchy, King Rat, Mouse, Big Jackie, Jamel, and Pretty Mike, who became a professional bodybuilder. My best training partner was Jackie. He was willing to drive iron anytime and anywhere. Jackie became like a biological brother to me. His family became mine and vice versa. If we weren't driving iron at the Palm Hall house or in the backyard where his mother, sister Gloria, and brother Joey lived, then we drive out to different gyms like Babe's Gym, Bill's Pearls, or Gold's Gym in Santa Monica. At Gold's Gym, I met Mr. Olympia, Arnold Schwarzenegger. One day, Jackie and I strolled past Arnold and a female on the boardwalk at Venice Beach. Indicating me, Arnold said to his companion, "See that guy there? Those aren't arms, they're legs." Jackie was like Buddha to me, a true friend. He was my closest homeboy, a loyal sidekick who would defend me to the end. His favorite saying was, "Tookie, you are the first, the last, and the only one. After you, there will be no one." Jackie was 6 feet tall, brown complected, and big chested with 18.5-inch arms, with a lot of definition, skinny legs, and long braids. He got a kick out of taking my shirt off to flex and make my chest jump up and down for women or a crowd of children. We coined the phrase, breaking out, for taking off our shirts to flex for people. Like break dancers competing against one another, Crips would break out and compete to see who was the biggest and the best built, especially for female attention. When Jackie and I weren't hanging out, I was over at the apartments on Central off Imperial, where a homeboy of mine, Godfather, was the manager. The place was a modern-day Sodom and Gomorrah, where fornication, gambling, drugs, and other debauchery were rampant. It was also where I was introduced to a variety of drugs, including paper acid, called blotter acid back then. I tried orange sunshine and microdot acid, but I preferred window pane because it kept me hyped up without tripping me out or seeing bizarre things. Admittedly, I did see traces, after images, like when I spit or waved my hand, but that was tame in comparison to seeing monsters and other horrors. It was odd that acid didn't seem to affect my energy or my strength while driving iron. Very unlike the lethargic feeling when I smoke weed, a rare event. I hid my drug problem from everybody, even Jackie. There I was, King Crip, seeking comfort in drugs like a drunkard seeing salvation in a bottle. I needed desperately to escape the madness around me, so I used acid and other deadly stimulants to block out the living nightmares, even though the blockage was temporary. My sharpness of wit was leaving me like water seeping through hundreds of tiny holes in a bucket. Though my chameleon role as a counselor was working, I believe I had most everybody fooled. I was destroying my mind in the process. My life was a contradiction. I didn't really expect to die, but I didn't care if I lived or died. With my soul unrepentant, I continued to engage in secret night raids on my rivals, who knew darn well it was me, though I left no calling card. To avoid the cops, we dress up as if going to church or a social gathering and creep around in an inconspicuous car, then park down the street. It was in the name of Buddha and other slaying Crips that I had no compunctions whatsoever about retaliation, nor did the rivals who opposed my existence. Strange how we Crips, Bloods, other black gangs, and the black street drug dealers were so gung-ho to obliterate one another. But why shy away when it came to confronting poverty, unemployment, politics, cop brutality, and other social inequities? Throughout most of my life, I was psychologically scarred. Since I wasn't psychotic, Bobby Wright's book, Psychopathic Radical Personality, confirms my analysis. Self-hatred motivated me to seek a kind of accomplishment by hurting other blacks. That's why I could stroll through Will Rogers Park during the Watts Festival equal to impress my fellow Crips by knocking unconscious any target they pinpointed. The Wets Festival was a knockout day for Crips. Any rival who stumbled into the park was spotted, then pounced upon. For me, the defensive measure for fighting had been overshadowed by the need to show off. I relished the moments to unleash my raw, repressed power in a single punch that drew oohs and ahs from bystanders. After such a display, cops made a clean sweep of the park to round up suspects, so Godfather and I ditched the crowd and headed in the opposite direction. A gang of cops met us at the far end of the park, and when I backtracked, I was met by yet another squad of cops coming up from behind us. Sensing a showdown between me and the Los Angeles Police Department, I took out my long earring in preparation. One tall cop, nicknamed Red, barked, "So, Tookie, you're a big bad Crip. Do you think you can fight all of us?" I looked at this cop who seemed to be growing horns and spewing hatred. I smiled and then said, "I can whip all you idiots if you put your guns in the trunk of the car." I heard guns and shotguns being cocked. Then Red said, "Raise your hands, Tookie. You're under arrest for assaulting a peace officer." I actually had to bail out, hiring Johnny Cochran once again to defend me. When I arrived at Palm House, Godfather told me that Tam, one of the most respected Pyrus, had been murdered. May he rest in peace. It was time to be on extra guard because Putin, one of the more lethal Pyrus, and his crew would now be on the warpath. In an unsurprising attack, the apartments Godfather managed were being firebombed in the front, along with constant drive-bys. But the Carver Park Crips, R. Tucker, UT, Terrible T, Trouble Man, Willie Herb, Big Chuck, Felton, and plenty of others who frequented the apartments were eager to assist. In systematic fashion, the Pyrus were hitting Compton Crips hangouts like they had a license to do so. This was the dawn of the Compton War between the Crips and Pyrus. Drive-bys took somewhat of a nosedive, and Buddha-like walk-up ambush shootings escalated on both sides. Living and working in Compton, the most devastating year for me was 1976. My grandmother, Mama, was on her deathbed, and from what I gathered, she was a little delirious. But when I spoke to her, she articulated herself with clarity. My mother told me that the day before Mama died, she had a premonition. Mama said, "You have to get Tookie out of California. Something terrible is going to happen to him. Please get him out of there." I brushed off the revelation as paranoia. I was Tookie, and I was invincible. Ever since I'd known Mama, she was elderly. It seemed as if a grandmother would live forever, so her death devastated me. I was supposed to have a stony heart wrapped in machismo, so Mama's death, may she rest in peace, was like a powerful electric jolt. To divert the pain, I immersed myself even deeper into the abyss of cripping. I was never known for packing a gun, even though I kept my pump shotgun in the trunk. I started toting a chrome 2-shot 38 Derringer for protection. I sought solace in night raids against my rivals to release my frustration, pain, and rage. I was still arrogant and foolish, with a drug addiction that rendered me lax and vulnerable to my opposition. Often I attended social gatherings, packing heat like I did at an adult night school graduation held at Crenshaw High. My stepsister Vicky was scheduled to receive her diploma. When I arrived, the graduation was underway, and the auditorium was filled to capacity. Always the performer, I grabbed a folding chair, sat it down in the middle of the aisle, then took off my coat. Dressed in all black with my Derringer's white pearl handle exposed in my vest pocket, people couldn't believe their eyes. Security guards watched me from the other side of the auditorium. Sitting with my head shining and muscles bulging through my long sleeve shirt, I was a monstrous size and more hostile than I had ever been. Not long afterward, Lee got out of jail. We were in my car headed towards Shaw's home when he nudged me and said, "Look out for those fools, cuz." When I turned my head to the left, another car had pulled up parallel with us. I was staring into the barrel of a gun. Pointing the gun was Little Vince, one of the Pyru's most deadly gunslingers. He had a demonic smile. Knowing he had caught me dead bang, I was furious for being in that position. Instead of shooting, he chuckled. Then the car sped off. Lee said, "I hate it when they do that." I said, "Let's give them something to smile about." After picking up a fancy new 9mm that converted into a pistol, I had Lee drive while I rode in the back seat with it on my lap. Driving down Alondra Street, several blocks before reaching Atlantic Drive, I spotted Little Vince and the other Pyru parked on the other side of the street. We motored up behind the car before they realized it. Suddenly, they were looking down the barrel of my 9mm. Little Vince's face twisted with fury, probably regretting not blowing my head off, or from fear of meeting his maker. Staring at him with hatred, I envisioned bullets slamming into his forehead. Then he oddly asked, "Did you get that 9 from Western Surplus?" I was about to get out when Lee whispered, "Let's go, cuz. Here come the pigs." I nodded and we drove off. Being eternal enemies, Little Vince and I regretted the missed opportunity. That wasn't the first time I was caught under the sights of an enemy gun. That deadly dance occurred occasionally between me and other Pyrus. You pull up alongside an enemy, point or flash your gun, and then spare his life as if you were God. Had they known for certain I was involved in numerous night raids against them, the Pyrus would have focused harder on offering me. Catching each other off guard during daylight without blasting away had more to do with the timing and too many witnesses around than with the generosity of spirit. Pyru Puddin was known for playing the cat and mouse game. He was a slinky character whom no one would take seriously in fisticuffs, but he possessed superior night creeping ability. He was hard to catch. There was only one person crazy enough to hunt Puddin down, no matter where he was, even on Pyru Street or at Looters Park. But Buddha was dead. At the Palm House, I was giving barbecues, and some Crips, like Bitter Dog, Bruno, and Petty Skip, had a knack for showing up exactly when it was time to eat. This was an era when Crips, Criplets, and others would show up with money-making schemes, mostly absurd, though some of their schemes had potential. But there were 3 things in life that I stayed away from because they unnerved me: rape, drugs, and burglary. Odd that I would use drugs all day, but refused to deal them. Though I was lacking in ethics, I drew the line when it came to rape. Burglary I avoided too, because I pictured myself entering a window in a home and getting blasted back out with a shotgun. There was a Criplet named Shirley who used to show up often with money-making schemes. One in particular that got Godfather's interest was the street trade, pandering female flesh. I never envisioned myself as a pimp, though I grew up around quite a few. When I was a youngster, I noticed that tough thugs used to rob pimps, beat them down, and treat them like punks. A thug named Big Rock used to say that any man who makes a living off pimping women was the lowest scum. He said pimps weren't respected on the streets or in prison. That's the main reason I shied away from pimping, no matter how often I was approached with tempting propositions. I did know some homeboys who had turned pimp like Crazy Crip, Undertaker, and Cube, but it didn't interest me. I recall sitting in the living room at the Palm House with Godfather, a room full of Criplets, and a number of other females interested in selling flesh. Both Shirley and Godfather had high hopes of schooling me on the fundamentals of pimping, but I wasn't motivated, and I stayed too high to really focus on their schemes. Godfather's pretext was simple: he was greedy, but Shirley's objective was to have me sexually. Though she was a fine woman, she looked like a thinner version of Bonnie, so I treated her like a sister, which she hated. Her get-back strategy was to make me jealous. Whenever I visited her at her grandmother's house on the east side, she would break out letters from Raymond. Her attempts to make me jealous weren't working, but after reading Raymond's letters, it was obvious he felt something for Shirley, or told her what she wanted to hear. It appears Shirley had exaggerated our relationship in a letter to him, and Raymond blew a gasket. Then someone, probably somebody close to Raymond, whispered lies to him about me trying to encroach on his territory, similar to what he did to Mac Thomas in Compton. The fabrication was preposterous, so I paid it no mind. I had done all that was humanly possible to expand the West Side Crips so that it could multiply on its own. An ambassador-sized version of Shaka Zulu's brilliance in absorbing other tribes to make them Zulus, I did the same with the West Side Crips, though I didn't know that my strategy paralleled Shaka Zulu's until many years later. I had no desire for more territory. I had pushed the West Side Crips so far west that only Pacific Ocean could thwart further expansion. As for the pimping scheme, well, there were close to 30 females willing to hook up with me, and promises of many more to come. It was a pimp's fantasy to be handed a flock of women without having to coach them or turn them out. It was a pimp's fantasy to be handed a flock of women without having to catch them or turn them out. But for me, cripping meant more than pimping, money, or the women themselves. Had I not been intoxicated most of the time, I probably would have designated Godfather as Mac Daddy and received my cut off the top, like Black Johnny, who always kept his palms fed. But any Machiavellian skills I may have possessed were waning with every tab of acid and every pull off of angel dust. What really prevented me from being involved in the criminal rat race was my counselor's paycheck and not having to buy food or pay bills out of my pocket. Since I was able to splurge, I bought 2 cars, a 1963 lime green Chevy in mint condition and a 1953 cocoa brown 2-door Oldsmobile that needed engine work but was gangstered down. I decided to give the Chevy to Godfather to assure myself that in case of any emergency, him and Mad Bull could get to wherever I was quickly. There were numerous rumors floating around in the air about the Pyrus plan to ambush me. A criplet named Sally warned me about this, but I was too hard-headed to listen. The thought of the Pyrus bringing it to me was absurd. I was Tookie, King Crip. They wouldn't dare try something like that. Didn't they know? It angered me so much that I initiated a couple more night raids for good measure. Sally was another gorgeous female fatale, able to maneuver among the Pyru circle and among other rival gangs. She was gifted with the looks, the shape, and the ears to listen to the braggadocio of certain Pyrus. But the more Sally told me about what she had heard, the less I took it seriously. But just in case, for back-to-back nights, Godfather and others were holding down security from the rooftop. I never changed my itinerary. It was business as usual for me. One night while in bed with Sally watching TV, I decided to take my pit bull puppy for a walk around the block while puffing on some thigh stick. In my long tweed coat was my .38 Derringer and a pocket full of loose bullets. When I rounded the corner, a car slowly drove by with a bunch of hardheads inside staring at me. I continued to walk with my hand in the coat pocket. Then they drove off. Whoever they were, I had been recognized. So I headed back to the house where I had several weapons more powerful than my Derringer. When I reached the house, I made sure everything was alright. Then placed my pump shotgun on the floor and closed the door. Earlier I told Godfather, Mad Bull, and Terrible T that I could handle it. But before they reluctantly left, Godfather asked several more times did I think it was cool. I simply patted the pump shotgun and said, yes, it's cool. Later that night, sitting on the porch, watching my dog run around the front yard, it seemed darker than usual and there was an unnatural peacefulness. As I puffed on the thigh stick, I thought about my homeboy Pretty Skip, a Long Beach Crip killed a couple nights before on the west side, deep in the Brims territory. He was caught in bed with his woman's boyfriend and he beat the guy down. The same night, Pretty Skip returned to the scene and was shot to death by the boyfriend and his homeboys. It puzzled me as to how someone could catch Pretty Skip off guard when he was always packing. I wondered if he was high. I snapped to alert when I heard my dog barking and growling. I turned my head in the direction where I was standing, but it was too dark to see anything. When I looked the other way, the darkness lit up with reddish gold flashes and the crackling sounds of fireworks. The thigh stick had me toasted, and I thought for a moment I was hallucinating, then realized I was being shot at. I dove off the porch and crawled to the side of the house. By the time I pulled out my Derringer and took aim, the shooters had vanished. In the sudden silence, the stench of gunpowder dominated the night air. A couple of times I tried to stand up, but my legs wobbled and I fell back down to the ground. Gritting my teeth, I used the water hose to cool down my legs and feet that were in fiery pain. I wondered what in the world was wrong with me. A faint light enabled me to see blood streaming out into the grass and into the earth. In agony, I had never felt so alone or vulnerable in my life. I had been knocked off my imaginary throne. I was scarred. I was horrified.